What is up, guys? Android HD here, and today I'm going to be showing you my take on a clean MVVM approach and how having a strong pattern in your code bases saves you time and energy in setting up projects and writing out your unit tests. Now, most of the code tutorials I do will have the same foundation, so I felt that it was very important for you guys to understand the logic behind the setup. I also would like to challenge you all to have an open mind and test this pattern on a sample project for yourself and see if it works for you. And if it's not your style of programming, then you at least have a better understanding of the code base going forward. Also, want to encourage you all to keep grinding and growing within your craft. And with that being said, let's get to work. Now, the first thing I want to talk about is what makes code clean to me. And a lot of times I've gotten asked this question, and people are expecting me to go over the architecture design. And from what I've understood and seen, is that most projects nowadays understand that you need to have some sort of architecture in your code. Whether it's MVP or MVVM, everybody is using something. Now, what I'm not seeing a lot of times is a clear cut pattern. And this is what I mean. Outside of MVVM, the pattern, of your code should make it really easy for somebody who is new to come in to look at the pattern to understand what's going on. And when they make additions to your code, they should be able to easily keep the integrity of your code. You shouldn't be able to know this is where this guy worked and this is where this guy worked. And a project that has a very strong pattern accomplishes that. And just as an example, if you look at the three directories I have open here, we have main menu, my profile, and this forgot password. Now, looking at these individual screens, you're able to see that there is a clear cut pattern within them. We have a callbacks interface, a data model class, a fragment class, and a view model class. And so today, I'm basically going to be going over each of those layers, right? So if we dive into this main menu fragment here, if we were to look at the layout, you see that it's nothing but a bunch of buttons. That's what it's composed of. So if I go into the fragment, you would expect to see a good amount of unclick listeners. But if you look, there are not any, right? There are no button that said unclick listeners here. And here inside of this fragment, what I like to use is this interface, which I call a callbacks. And I use this interface in conjunction with this view model to data bind these unclick listeners to the layout. To me, it's a very, very clean way of doing it, very clean setup, and it allows my frags to each all have the same pattern when it comes to handling button clicks. And so with that being said, if I'm going to go into this view model class and I'm going to go over the individual sections. So my view models, I've been able to organize them always into four distinct sections, four distinct things going on within this view model. And so at the top, you have your getters and setters, which I keep the term getters and setters because I originally started in Java. But yeah, you have your getters and setters, and these might be things that could go into your fragment. I like to keep the fragment as clean as possible. Then I usually will put them here in your view model. And so underneath that, you have your unclick listeners. And so these unclick listeners are actually the interface callbacks that I've created, and I use those to data bind them to the view. So if you look at this view, the unclick listener here is calling that view model equivalent. So I handled that my unclick listeners here as well. The third thing that I put into the view model is the business logic of the view. So I don't like to have any business logic inside of my fragment or activities. You can easily go through your projects and look for these. They're all over the place. If I had, if this was a login screen and I wanted to check to make sure the password and confirmed password were the same, that business logic would exist here, and it would return a Boolean value here to the fragment. So that's how I like to have my business logic within the view model. And then the fourth section is what I like to call a data model. And these would be my data model requests. Now it's important to understand that this main menu section, it does make an API call. but you'll notice that you don't see any made here in this view model. There's been many projects where I've seen API calls being made within the view model, and to me, it just gets really, really messy. So what I like to do is I like to take all those API calls and create another layer for those into a class I call the data model. Now, this data model only has API calls and handles the responses. And as you see here, this is actually hitting a Firestore database that I have. It hits that database, it interprets the results, and it uses the callbacks here to handle what happens. So if I have a quote returned here, if I need to handle an error, it's going to happen on these two right here. And so we've kind of went over those different layers that I like to use. And I'm going to go back to this view model. Now that you've kind of gotten an understanding of the setup, every section inside of this view model should be able to be tested besides the getters and setters. And if it's still written in Java, then you technically could test it. I just don't see the purpose of doing that in Kotlin. And so this pattern means a lot to me just because of not only does everything has its proper place, but it's easy for me to write tests. Now, with my eyes closed, I know that the on-click listeners, the business logic, and the data model requests should all have unit tests. And so when I was starting, one of the things that I had a lot of trouble just trying to understand is what type of things should you have unit tests around? And, if you adopt this setup, if you want to test it out, then you know that, okay, I need to create a unit test for the data model request. You should have a unit test for if there is a network connection, then you know that this should be called. And if there isn't, then we want to handle that error. You should be able to easily mock up these button clicks. And also your business logic should 100% definitely have unit tests. Also, within the data model, the API requests that you create should also have unit tests. And in a later video, I'm going to go over unit testing in this pattern and my way of doing it. But yeah, these should all have your unit tests. So if you know that 100% of the time, it makes writing unit tests really easy. And one of the things I've come to understand is your unit tests should be just as easy as the pattern that you use in your code base. So if you have a particular pattern, then guess what? Your unit test is going to adhere to that pattern. It's going to be really easy for you to write those. So one of the things that I like about this approach is it is really, really easy for me to find bugs. If I had a client that said, hey, this main menu, or let's just say this login screen, for some reason the requests aren't going through, or we're getting this error that's showing, maybe saying that the request timed out, something's going on, I automatically know, okay, let me go into the data model for that. And lo and behold, if you go in here into my login fragment and you open up this class, guess what? There's your login data model. So I automatically know, let me go and check that data model out. And for you guys that might have multiple clients, or if you just have several apps that you're working on your own, it's going to be really, really easy. You can go back on a project that you did a year ago and you will still understand what's going on. You're like, okay, well, let me check that data model out. So all my projects adhere to this same pattern. It's really easy for me to find and fix bugs. It's really easy for me to go back on the older project and quickly understand what's going on. And also, there's been several times in the past to where I've had to collaborate with other people, to where I've brought people on to help me manage one of the projects that I was working on, or we have some kind of a collaboration. So in the past, when I've done that, it's been really, really easy for that person to go into my project and say, okay, I see what's going on. And when I ask them, hey, could you add a messaging section here? They automatically know that it's going to have a certain pattern just because of what's already been put into the application. And I'm going to open up another directory, and I just wanted you to see, guess what? Here we have fragment, callbacks, data model, and view model. Again, it's really, really easy for you to understand the pattern and what's going on here. So in a nutshell, this is basically my setup. This is what I use on a day-to-day basis. And that being said, this is going to wrap up today's tutorial. I want to thank you guys for joining me today. And I'll say that feel free to check out the Github link below for the reference to the code base. Also, understand that this code that I'm showing you today is an active project that I'm working on. So The GitHub link will be a light version of this particular project. As always, feel free to comment below for any other tutorials or questions that you might have, and I will see you guys in the next video. Take care.